Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let's kick it off. Okay, today is let's say Friday the 6th, right?
Yeah.
Friday 6th, and we got the in-person podcast today with Martin Gonzalez. We share the last name, which is I guess not.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we do. Yeah, nice.
It used to. Well, it's original. My last name is Gonzalez with an S, but it used to be with a Z. But they.
Oh, really? Okay.
they my dad's in the Philippines. He was born in the Philippines, and they messed up his birth certificate. So my grandfather has a Z, but my dad has an S, and then I guess now it's an S.
So there aren't a lot of Z's.
Really?
Gonzalez with a Z in the Philippines, so we might actually be related. Who knows?
We could. I have a 23 in me, so we could find that. We could find that out.
That's right, yeah.
What part of the Philippines? Manila, you said?
Manila. I grew up in Manila. Yeah.
I've never been. My family's from Cebu, so
Okay.
if you've heard of Cebu, then
Yeah. Cebu's a great place. I lived there for a bit for my.
Oh, you did?
My first job took me to that part of the Philippines, and I lived there for
wow.
6 months or so. Yeah. It's
Man,
great. The food's great. I mean, the food's great. Almost in every pocket of the Philippines, you can find some really good stuff.
man, yeah. I was just there in like November of last year, so with the book, if it goes well and you can introduce me to people, I'll go back there and definitely like show up.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know exactly who to introduce you to. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like before we kick it off officially, I'll just mention a couple things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got merch coming out. It's at startmindsets.com. If you startmindsets.com/shop, and check out like some hoodies we got there, and as well as like a hat and like a shirt if you like to support the show. And shout out to Giovanni, my good friend. He lent me this laptop today to use, and shout out to Mike Liu from Freefuse. He and I are building a community, so if you guys are interested in what's that word? Like being part of like the Start Mindsets community and getting access to people like Martin to kind of like bounce ideas off of or get feedback on product stuff. That's something we've got in the works. Shout out to Arcane. They paid for a sponsored post later next week. So their marketing software that was #1 on Product Hunt, and they're from Europe. So there'll be more info on them in the description. But last thing is join our email list at startermindset.com for a chance at the free book. Yeah, I mean, today I've got Martin Gonzalez today with me, and we're at his humble abode in Redwood City. So
Thanks for having me.
Oh man, no worries. And I guess I'll echo that too. Like, thanks for having me.
Yeah, right. My home. Yeah.
Yeah. So Martin, I guess like just like how do you? I mean, you mentioned you're born and raised in Manila and all that. And now you have a book, right? So we don't want to forget that you have a book, and it's called The Bonfire Moment.
That's right.
I guess like you as an author and like having a career at Google, what are you? How do you introduce yourself to like somebody at like a tech networking event, or like maybe you're at a gathering? Who knows what it's for?
How do you reduce yourself to a label? So I tend to talk about my work, my kind of portfolio career in 3 parts. Mm-hmm. So part 1 of my work is my core job at Google is I'm a principal of org and leadership development. Mm-hmm. And what that means is I work closely with our AI research and engineering leaders to really think through some of their strategic people and organizational issues. So things like, do we, in this business unit, do we have the right culture set up? Do we have the right structure in place? Do we have the right capabilities to get to our work? I often tell people that this part of my work, I tell them that it's kind of like the business equivalent of the CIA. Like, we usually come in for high stakes issues, but we work behind the scenes. And when we do our jobs well, things are better, but no one knows we're there. So that's the first part of the platform, or the first platform of this portfolio career. The second one is what eventually led to this book, The Bonfire Moment. It's a 20% project I've had for about 8-9 years. Some people might know that Google allows us to work on passion projects. And I supported Josh, my co-author, to build the accelerator program 9 years ago. It's now called Google for Startups Accelerator.
Really?
And I helped him build out the curriculum for people and culture, and we can get into it later on, but eventually it led into building up what we call the Effective Founders Project, which is a global research study that looks at founders, good and bad, across the world, put them under a microscope and understand, well, what makes the most effective different from the least effective. So that's the second part. The third quick one is I come from a family of teachers, so I have always had the heart of a teacher. So my primary affiliation is with Stanford. I teach there in the winter on topics such as like people analytics and organizational culture, entrepreneurship. Also spent a little bit of time in Wharton and INSEAD doing the same. This evening, actually, by the time I boot you out, I'll be teaching a virtual course in the Philippines with the University of Asia and the Pacific where I went to school. So that's how it's a mouthful. So in short, I might just say to a founder, like, I'm the author of the Bonfire Moment, and I'm immensely curious about the people part of building businesses.
Yeah, man, I got a book coming out too, so I'm gonna steal like your framework of having an author. But I think just keep it short and simple, right? Like I'm the author of Startup Mindsets or co-author, right?
It takes a bit of getting used to. Like when you're first author, you think, oh, I'm now an author. How do I move in the world now? It's a surreal experience.
Yeah. I love to hear like when I guess like the book was published, right? Like it happened this year. Like did you have I feel like for me, I'd have to pinch myself. Like I'm living in a simulation.
So there were multiple pinch myself moments. I think the first moment was when we got the book deal.
Oh yeah.
Like you must have felt that. It's like I can't believe someone actually wants to put money down for these ideas, and that wow, I'm actually going to be an author one day. And then when I finally held the final manuscript in my hands, where it was like 18 months of writing, and I wrote this book. Like in the wee hours of the morning, I was up at 4 a.m. writing until I had to wake up the kids for school at 6:30, and that's kind of so that moment. And then the publisher will send you like a pre-launch copy, which is like basically an ugly version of the book, usually softbound, and then finally they'll send you like the final book. And when you hold that gorgeous little thing in your hands, that for me was the actual launch day really was a wash. Like actual launch day, at that point you had seen the book, you had worked on pre-recording podcasts and all that, so it's less of a high on that specific day.
Yeah, I mean, so did they like they mailed the book to this address, I'm guessing, or something like that?
Yeah, they mailed me one or two boxes of books. And so I very quickly like put one in my shelf, gave a few to some friends who helped me through the process. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, man, and also I was gonna say that you had like some really notable endorsers like Gary Tan, he's a guy who runs Y Combinator, right?
Yeah, he's the current CEO. Yeah.
Eric Rees too, who has a killer book, The Lean Startup. I've read that. And
Scott as well was so kind to endorse our book. She wrote Radical Candor. Yeah.
I guess like this question goes out to like if somebody's like thinking about wanting to be a business author.
Yeah.
And the endorsements parts, like how should they like? Did you already know Gary Tan before you like said, "Can I have an endorsement?" Or like, how did that or any of those folks?
So it's a mix, right? I can almost tell a different story for each of those names. Like it's a mix. It's a combination of people that were in my network, people who were in my extended network, and then people who were in the network of my literary agent and my publisher. So for Gary Tan in particular, we were looking for a really good story about kind of a startup failing, and he's actually been very public about his experience through his first startup called Posteris, which was it was eventually acquired by Twitter before he then went on to do Y Combinator, and he writes up a few blogs about it. And we thought, it would be nice to write up his story. So we did all the desk research, and then we finally reached out to him and said, hey, we want to write up your story in the book. Could we interview? So that was the first touch point. He was so gracious to give us a time. He actually, this might have been actually before he became, like it was maybe a month or two before he was announced to be the CEO of Y Combinator.
Yeah.
And then later on, when the book was ready to go out and we needed endorsements, we reached out and said, hey, do you think you'd be open to endorsing? And he was, again, so gracious to accept.
Yeah, I've read a lot of business books, and I can tell you have a lot on the bookshelf. So I guess like as somebody who's read books around like that subject matter, and you like would see in the back like this is endorsed by like the CEO of X, Y, and Z. Like I guess that really helps like readers want to buy the book, you think? Or what do you think is like the best benefit of having a celebrity or somebody like that endorse the book?
Yeah, if I'm such a data guy, and like I have a very, like, I don't like making causal statements if I don't know it to be true through evidence. And so the honest answer is I don't really know like how much pull. Like there are books that do really, really well that have no celebrity endorsers, and there are books that do really poorly and they have like Adam Grant and and all these great names on there. So
Yeah.
it's hard to tell. But for my book in particular, I was so grateful for Kim Scott, for Gary Tan, for Eric Ries. I think in some ways they legitimize the book to some extent.
Uh-huh.
There are many books that launch like in a year. I don't know, in the US there are several tens of thousands of books in the non-fiction space. So like how do you kind of stand out from the pack, right? It's who your publisher is, who's talking about your book, who your endorsers are. Those are the things that I think ultimately will help you stand out. Yeah.
Out of all the accomplishments, I guess, where do you rank like publishing a book in the things you've done in your life?
Oh, that's such an this this book was such a humble project to begin with. Like we really truly did not think it would be a big deal kind of book. Like when we started this workshop 9 years ago, and it somehow we tried it in Jakarta, it went so well. We thought, let's try it again. We tried it in Bangalore, it went so well. Then it went to Sao Paulo, then to Warsaw, then to Stockholm, and at some point it had reached 70 countries. At some point, founders were saying like, look, you've done this so often. Like, where's the book that captures all that you've done? And so we thought, okay, this might have been like a wonderful 9-year collaboration. Like, let's just write the book as a capstone to that work. And somehow, a really good publisher, Harper, picked up the book, and so it's definitely up there. Like it's been I feel like I will look back many years from now and think, wow, that was a career shifting kind of moment for me. But I must say, like, I would have never thought. I knew I always had a dream to write a book, as many people do.
Yeah.
But I always thought in my field to write a book on leadership, like you would write it with gray hair, usually at when you're in your 60s, 70s. I never thought I would do it. Like we started the process, I was in my mid 30s. It took a while, so I'm no longer in my 30s. I'm in my 40s. But yeah, it's definitely up there. Yeah.
Man, I got an interesting story. Like I think for me, I have an English degree, so
okay.
I like even back when I was an undergrad, like I wanted to write a novel, but
Yeah.
Earl, I guess like it's so interesting because I come back to, I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and my parents are from Cebu, but just seeing that and like Earl had the original idea for the book, so he was doing a lecture or something like that at the venture fund I was working for, and he at the last slide it said start mindsets, and like this is like his next project, and I was like, Earl, what's up, man? Like you should help me like can I help you edit the book? And I guess like he wanted me to be a co-author, and now like the podcast was another branch out of having the idea for the book, and we're here today, and the book's coming out November 26th in Singapore. But
it's amazing.
But
I'm so excited for you guys.
Oh yeah, man. It's a little bit crazy too. Like, so I guess one thing I wanted to ask was, how do you think having a book out helped you in your career or your future aspirations or anything like that?
Yeah, so the book's only been out for maybe 3 months, and in those 3 months, like I'll tell you some of the moments where I realized, wow, without a book, I would not be able to experience X.
Really?
So one, I get the most random outreach from random people from random places in the world, saying, I picked up your book, I brought it to the beach, I sat down with your book, and I appreciate it for this and that. Like that for me is, that in some ways is when Gutenberg created the printing press. I guess that was kind of the idea behind books, right? You get to spread ideas far and wide to people that you maybe wouldn't be able to meet in person. I think there's also moments where I pinch myself and I realize, okay, like I need to be extremely responsible, because people are now ready to implement whatever I kind of tell them to do. Like they look to me for advice, and there's this weight of responsibility of like, I better give advice that I believe is going to be valuable and useful, and not just willy nilly like speak off the cuff. And I think, like, let's be honest, like there are a lot of business books out there that I feel don't carry as much responsibility for for giving good advice. So anyway, I feel a lot of that when I speak in groups and in podcasts.
Yeah, man. I mean, you guys got some notable achievements too, like USA Today and something else. Like I remember seeing that. Did you what's that word? Did you what's that word? Was that a goal of yours, or
So
unexpectedly happened?
We the one thing that I learned painfully when I got into this as an author is there are certain like metrics, vanity metrics, if you will, that somehow authors care about. But as someone who was just a book reader, I never really cared about these book lists. But I find that it's actually apparently I discovered that a lot of people read lists and they use that as a shopping guide for books. So at some point I realized, okay, we should figure out how to get ourselves seen by the people who write up these lists. So in some ways we did have a bit of a strategy around like how do we gain their attention, how do we set ourselves up to get to get on some of these lists. But I'll say like that's absolutely the cherry on top. Like for me, the real goal was to get these ideas and these tools as far and wide as possible, and and we're still far from that goal. Like we actually technically are now an international bestseller, and we're actually reprinting the book with with that label, and it will come out very soon, that version of the book. But no, I still feel like we're so far away from really the mission. Is to like the mission for us is, can we get every single startup all across the world to think a lot more thoughtfully about the people issues in their teams?
Yeah, and that's like kind of the thesis of what you guys created, right? Like that majority of the problems from startups are internal fights and kind of like you think of the social network, like with Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo having like that big tiff. I guess like for you, like maybe if we could look into that deeper, what particularly, or what's something that people who haven't read the book that you think that you really have like a unique insight into? Or
so we started the book with with almost like a call to arms, and the intro is called "Startups Have a People Problem," and we basically lay out the evidence and the data around why we believe this to be true. One of the first studies we cite in the book is a classic study out of Harvard, which was done a few years ago and has been replicated recently, that basically asked VCs, like, think about your portfolio and the startups that failed in your portfolio, and what were the top reasons for failure? 65% of startups fail because of people issues. And it's co-founder conflict, it's not assembling the right complementary skill sets, it's not creating the right the right productive culture of the team. It's seeing a lot of the good people go and somehow retaining the mediocre people. It's all these many things. It's not letting go of that old, that early employee who's a close friend, but because you care so much about them, you're not able to make good decisions around the business. So it's all these people problems that really sink the most promising startups. And the interesting thing is we don't talk enough about this in the startup space. Like, in the startup space, there's a lot of obsession over the product, around timing the market, around fundraising, as if you had all three, you'd scale really well. Unfortunately, we often forget that it's the people issues that are really the thing that will crumble the startup from within.
Yeah, I've definitely like seen that. Well, I mean, like anything too, like a small business too, like that could be applicable, right? Or like but startups too, I guess like they're different from traditional businesses in a sense that they like have a heavy tech aspect, and perhaps like other businesses like they don't need to use AI, or you know what I mean? Like what do you think like the people who are in startups more often than not, are they is it like a personality clash thing, or is it more like like egos, right?
So I think the number one like the beginnings of this problem come from a very common habit that startups have, which is, I'm almost make it seem like the startups are a person, but we know from the data that most startups will have co-founders because it's a very difficult, journey to go alone. So many will have co-founders, and then many will co-found with friends or family.
Oh yeah.
At a time where you only have a pitch deck or an idea and no traction, maybe no cash to pay anyone, it's friends or family that are willing to kind of help you out, right? And then we know from the data that if that's your configuration, friends or family, those are the most unstable partnerships. Those partnerships will break up faster than people who find themselves through people who are acquaintances, who find themselves through an interview style process. More stable than that are startups who find each other through who were coworkers previously. The reason why these friends and family relationships are the most unstable is because those are incredibly expensive relationships. You have you have this working relationship you're trying to create with the startup, and then on top of that, you have the personal relationship. So if that relationship blows up, the damage is so much more severe than if it was with a coworker or an acquaintance.
You have to live with them sometimes.
We tell the story of one of these startups who co-founded in Brazil, who co-founded with a brother whose father was, I think, was part of their engineering team at some point, and then their aunt was in the finance team or in the medical team. And at some point they had to fire the aunt because somehow it wasn't working out. And they had really tense Christmas dinners for the next 2 years. So many people who are listening to this show are probably thinking, "Oh damn, should I quit?" Because it's my college buddy who I co-founded with, or my spouse. Well, the message is that don't quit. The message is you just need to put in the hard work. So that's where it begins. And then there are many other things, such as founders are under immense amounts of short-term pressure. There's a lot of winning that short game. How do you get that product out? And in many ways they get sloppy about some of the people decisions, such as hiring is one good example. If you created a ledger where on one side you say, what is the possible upside if this hire does really well, and on the other side you say, well, what's the potential downside if this was a bad hire? You'll very quickly discover that the downside could be incredibly difficult, and sometimes we make snap judgments about people we hire. We spend more time thinking about which car to buy than which employee to hire, right? And the value of a bad hire is or the value that's destroyed by a bad hire is incredibly high.
Martin, what got you into I guess entrepreneurship and startups in your career? Was it you had a role model who you kind of noticed was cool to you, or did you have a passion for technology? Where did that come from, you think?
So the first thing I should say is I have not founded a startup, which I think pushes me to really look at the data, and we try to be as rigorous as we can in the book.
I haven't either. So
yeah,
I have LLC, but that's not the same thing.
Yeah,
almost.
No, I have an LLC too. Yeah, I guess technically I'm a founder, but what is it? I grew up being so I have more passion for kind of the role of leaders and organizational psychology more than specifically tech startups. I grew up in the Philippines at a time where a lot of these grassroots youth-based organizations were a really big part of growing up.
Oh wow!
There wasn't a lot of finding people through internet type communities, and a lot of it was you just need to go out and and join the church group or the youth group or the organization at school. And at a very young age, I was maybe 16, 17, I would get a bunch of leadership books and I would invite these young kids to a weekend seminar that I would just create from scratch. And I was
really, wow.
I was probably telling them wrong things, but I loved it. I can't tell you that. I was in my element. I would stay up late at night to get the materials together. I would obsess over some of these details that people who don't love this stuff would never care to obsess over. and it was just, and I knew at that moment, okay, there's something here that maybe can become like something like of a profession, but I had no role models at the time. Like there was no one who was doing this work that had my background. A lot of the people who were doing this work were like celebrities or, you know, sports coaches turned leadership guru. Like I didn't see a path, and I thought, you know, I pursued a business career. I was a product manager at Johnson & Johnson, and I did strategy consulting, and at some point I had a chance to go back to school, and I thought, you know what, you only live once. Like, why don't I go and study like organizational psychology? And I loved every class. Like, and most people don't have the benefit of going to school and thinking every class is just blowing my mind each minute.
That was what you had?
That was what I had for 2 years, and I realized, okay, the depth of interest in this space is deep enough to kind of create a lifetime of a career out of this.
Where'd you? I know you went to undergrad in the Philippines, but for MBA, was it MBA or grad school?
So I did a master's in organizational psychology in Columbia.
Oh,
University.
in New York.
Yeah, in New York. And at some point when I was already at Google, I did a second master's in behavioral science in the London School of Economics.
Did you live in New York and the UK at the
So I lived in New York for 2 years, which were really it was a wonderful
Manhattan,
time.
or
Manhattan,
you were
okay? Upper West Side.
Upper West.
I was close to campus, which was nice. I was in this graduate dorm called the International House. It was really fun. There were people from all around New York, but I didn't live in London. It was one of these programs where I flew in, I think 3 or 4 times for a couple of weeks each time.
Oh wow. I guess like going on that, like to switch the dial, like New York. What was your first impression of, I guess, New York, like Manhattan, New York, and did you stick out like a sore thumb, or did you like it? Did you think people were rude?
No, so it was my first experience at a multicultural city.
Uh-huh.
And I realized that I love the multicultural city vibe, which is everyone there is alien to that space, and therefore everyone is, you know, there are locals who live there, obviously. So like, especially in grad school, like everyone is just there to learn about each other's culture, and so that was really great. The creative vibe of New York, you just can't replicate.
Can't do
it. Like London comes close, but New York is such a special place, and so like I would be exhausted from studying, and I would think, okay, well, what if I just take the one train down to Broadway, to Times Square, and just watch a show on like a lottery ticket of like $20 to watch The Lion King. I thought, like, when else can I do this?
Yeah, man. I mean, I went to New York like for the first time last year in October, and I'm like, I guess living in San Francisco, you hear like comparisons, but I don't think you really compare because you turn left and you see like so much going on. It's a little bit of a how do you like the cup is overflowing type of thing.
Yeah. New York is, and you know, visiting. You get that kind of stimulus overload, but even living there, and well, I lived in Manhattan, so I had the good fortune of living like smack in the middle of all the action. That was really fun.
How long? So you were there for like 2 years getting
for 2 years for that program. Yeah.
Did you work at the same time getting the program, or were you like not working
I did
at all?
the program full time.
Really?
I worked for 4 years. I saved up as much as I could. Went out there, you know, I had the good fortune of my parents helped me with tuition, but I basically spent down all my savings.
No way.
Living in New York. That place is expensive. You know,
that's really expensive.
One day I dream of living in New York again, but with money, because that's a whole different experience. I think for a student, you only like, experience like a sliver of it.
I mean, I think like just even for anyone who goes to New York, there's like you don't know what to do because there's so much things to do.
Yeah.
I feel like here though, like
so much to do.
The Bay Area, how would you contrast it if you had to New York, or at least if you were able to?
I have the best contrast. So I have really good friends. Their names are Kate and Kina. Kina, Christina, she lives in New York.
Uh-huh.
They're twins. Okay,
we
grew up together in the Philippines, and then at some point, one lives in LA. And then one lives in New York. Okay? So, and I have this moment where, and I'm in New York, I'm with Kina, one of the twins, and then Kate from LA, you know, LA's not the Bay Area, obviously, but
Right.
kind of the California vibe. She comes to LA, to New York, and first of all, we're walking down the street, and she's like constantly behind because she's not.
They don't walk
They
out in
don't
LA.
walk.
They don't walk. They don't walk in LA.
And then she's like saying hi to everyone, like, "Hey, how you doing? Like, how's everything?" And we're like, "Stop being so nice. People here are just, they're all business. Like, let's go."
Man.
That was a good moment of like, okay, this is sharp contrast. But I love both. I love both cultures.
Yeah, yeah. I went to New York and I met Max Levchin, the CEO of a firm, like on the street.
Okay.
And I said hi to him and like we had a conversation. I took a photo, but it ended up we didn't take a photo.
Oh
But
no.
But to say like you met like a billionaire just out of nowhere,
Yeah.
and he was part of the PayPal mafia, which is
Yeah,
relatively famous.
Yeah.
But I guess like for you, Martin, like with the book, and have you like met I guess like the people who endorse the book, but like when people you come across that are like super successful, and like what's your like thought there? Like let's say like if you were to just be at a major high profile networking event, like is it the goal to sell books? Is the goal just to be nice and friendly? And
so I think I don't know that the goal is to sell books or to, you know, what I do think. Let me tell you what I think when I meet someone incredibly successful. I think about how I think as humans we have what highfalutin like academics will call agentic preference.
Mhm.
Agentic preference basically means we would much rather believe that the things we see around us and the success I see in my life is because of some agency I have, because of some actions I did. And I think we undervalue or we underestimate the importance of good luck
yeah,
in success. And every time I see a really successful person, I ask myself, you know, what were the circumstances in their life that, one, opened the doors for them, and then two, gave them the psychological and mental capacity to actually meet that opportunity and turn that into like success. Because it's both, right? People who are successful aren't just like lucky. They're lucky, but they met the luck with like hard work, grit, what have you,
tenacity, sure.
tenacity, a humility to kind of embrace the opportunity, whatever that is, right? So that's and this is what plagues you when you're like
Like entrepreneurs here.
well, and I wouldn't call myself an organizational psychologist, but in some ways that's my work. And so I'm constantly like psychoanalyzing people as I meet them. And, you know, please don't worry if you meet me in person, like I'm not creepy. I'm very nice and sociable.
I was gonna say, do you meet like people? I guess like in Silicon Valley, right? Like there's a lot of work from home culture. You feel like you're able to do that as well as you'd like to over a camera on Zoom, or does that happen differently, right? Like when you're in a real building and
Yeah, I mean, in person you can't beat the in person. You can get so much further.
yeah.
When you meet someone in person. That's how I'm so happy that we.
Oh yeah, man! I said you live like 20 miles south, so
Yeah, we might as well have.
or 20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
How do you like working at Google? Is that where you? That's where you work now, right?
Yeah, so I've been at Google for 10 years.
Oh wow.
And it's been quite the ride. I've worked in Singapore.
Oh, Google all the way in Asia.
I started in Google Singapore. I did 4 years there. I did about almost 2 years in Google Taiwan, and then came out here about 4 years ago. And Google's been so good to me, and it's been such an incredible. It's an opportunity of a lifetime to kind of work with. You know, I tell people like a big part of the joy of my work is the spectator sport of seeing all the cool stuff that the people at Google are building for the future, and the adrenaline of that, and just the starry-eyed like dreamers who are like, well, if that's a problem, we can fix it with these tools. Like that kind of idealism, it's intoxicating. It's really, and I've worked in many other industries where in those industries, you know, the dominant mindset is, well, if you think you can fix it and it's still not fixed, like why do you think you could make it happen? If it hasn't been fixed already now, surely it's unfixable. That's like the dominant narrative. Whereas here at Google and I guess in Silicon Valley, it's like, oh, it's broken. Well, it might as well be me who will fix it. There's some hubris and like some messianic complex to that. But But I love that starting point because that's how you make progress in the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, so Google in Singapore, I guess, like, is there like a different um, culture from Google in the U.S. or like, you think so? Or
I think there's some differences, but there's also a way that, you know, Google, you know, every year that Google has been around, the hiring numbers of Google are easily like you're hiring a unicorn company in terms of size. Like it's in the 5 digits in terms of hiring. I think our biggest hiring year was maybe 20,000. How many companies do you know that are 20,000 in size, right? So
yeah,
so we put a lot of thinking and research and data behind evidence behind like, you know, recruitment practices. And so I think a big part of what happens as a result is there's, to some extent, there's a certain bar in terms of cultural and kind of generative cognitive ability, as we call it. It's not quite IQ, but it's your ability to solve problems. Like that tends to be a fairly consistent bar across different countries.
Oh yeah.
So I think there is some variance, but it's not that pronounced. Yeah.
I was gonna ask you because I used to work at Google for a little bit in 2018, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, I was at Mountain View in 1350. Do you have like a favorite restaurant or like free food? Right? Do they still have free food?
Yeah.
They have a lot of free food.
What did you do for Google?
I was like working on a project for like their it was like one of my first jobs out of university, and like we were basically like transferring data in like they had their agencies and their advertisers and just trying to make it align, and it was in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Was one thing I did there.
Yeah.
But
that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you worked in the part of Google that
the ads or something.
That funds all the cool tech. My favorite restaurant. I mean, gosh, like I pinch myself often.
Just
when
the Googleplex one.
How lucky, you know, one could be to have free food. There's some people will say that there's an Indian restaurant, and I've tried it twice.
Is it called Badal?
Badal.
Oh, you know Badal?
I've been there twice. And
yeah,
people
right.
have said it's the best Indian food you can find in the Bay Area. I'm not super sure if that's the case. I really like Zareen's, which you can find in like Redwood
Mediterranean,
City,
right?
Palo Alto. No, Zareen's is a Indian Pakistani place. I think that's really good.
Huh, yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I gained a lot of weight there, man. Or not. I mean, at least like 10 pounds at least.
Oh,
but
yeah. No,
you know, it's like a buffet every day. It's just you can't help yourself.
Indeed, yeah.
So right now, do you work at home half the time, or like do you get to?
No, so we need to be in 3 days a week.
Oh, really?
I actually really like going into the office. The context switching, the kind of that in between time from home and work, like I like it. I mean, every now and again, I will take advantage of the hybrid setup, so I'll work from home, but it's just not the same. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a hard to describe environment. Like there's, what is it called? Like it's like its own society, right? Like.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was just talking to someone recently.
And if you don't have a badge, they'll like neglect you or something.
Well, yeah, you need to have a badge to get in. But like they do well about like keeping things convenient, which really helps you then focus on on the work. Which is not to say like people are like, you know, burning out constantly. Like we try to be good about not burning people out, but yeah, I was talking to someone about like there's an interesting stream of research around what they call total institutions. Total institutions are places where basically the place embraces all your needs.
Mm-hmm.
Total institutions include things like prisons, or to some extent, I guess boarding school or daycare centers, right? And so. In some ways, Google, I think, is
an airplane too, right? No?
An airplane, I guess you could say
Airplane.
that. Yeah. So Google's kind of in between a prison and a daycare center, somewhere there.
Yeah. I think like it's a little bit rare too, like because I think like in LinkedIn or social media, Instagram, like people will say like quit your job or leave your job for like the next cool thing.
Yeah.
But Google, yeah, like I I don't know how it could get better. Although like I could see like different people like want different things, of course, right? So
Well, so I one thing that I was very clear about, I Google was my first company in tech.
oh really?
Before Google, I was in consulting, and I worked with all the many industries like healthcare and consumer goods and tourism. I was very clear that coming into tech, there is no tech company that will succeed for decades and decades and decades. And maybe Google will be the anomaly, but if you were to go by what the track record is of all the Bell Labs and the Xeroxes and the and the GEs of this
Emerson,
world, like all like the history books of technology, every one of them had their heyday, and every one of them eventually like declined, right? It's just part of the industry. I think part of what keeps the tech industry fresh is you have new companies emerge and challenge the old. So all that to say, like, it's been such a wonderful time at Google. There will come a time where there will be another thing, and I have we need to be at Google. We're very, in many ways, if you go to the Google, if you remember the Google campus, Larry Page gifted the company with this dinosaur,
the Rex, right? Or
T-Rex.
Stein or something like that. No,
Oh, you know what? I forgot it. Yeah, I think
can't-
you might be right. I don't remember the name, but he gifted that to the company to tell the company, look, if you don't stay hungry and paranoid, like, you will turn into a dinosaur, and that's just the reality of tech. It's just the reality of tech. So I'm bullish about Google's future, but I'm also well aware that there are so many factors that come into play in terms of long success.
Yeah, I'd say that I think like there too, like a lot of people have told me that they get too comfortable there and they don't know the point of their job anymore. Like, does that ever, I wouldn't say cross your mind, but it depends on the departments, right? Because like if there's what's it called, like if there's like I don't know, it's like you kind of lose meaning in something if it's so easy, or not easy but so mundane, right?
Yeah, and so I as you can imagine, a lot of people come and reach out to have a career chat and try to talk through some of their, and at Google but also outside of Google, and something I always tell them is a lot of this is a mix between your approach to the work and the work itself, right? I think there's a belief that burnout is caused by work that is intense and like high intensity for long periods of time, right? That's what leads to burnout. I believe, and I've seen also the research around this, that actually burnout is not an issue of exhaustion or fatigue. It's an issue of a lack of meaning in the work. So when you're working on something really intensely that you feel personally meaningful to you, like you can go far,
Yeah, right.
and for long periods of time. But when it's not meaningful, and when it's not meaningful to you, like, it's a time to then think, okay, well, what do I find meaningful? Because in some ways, I don't know that a lot of us can have a good answer to that question of what do we truly find meaningful.
Yeah, I think that it is a tough thing. I mean, people go to school just to figure that out. So
Yeah. It's a good way, and it's a good strategy as long as you go to school to then look inside of yourself, right? Like, I think you won't find that meaningful job somewhere outside. Like, a lot of it is also just think about, what really are your value system, what really, brings meaning and joy to your life. Like, a lot of that is introspection.
I guess like if you had to answer your own question, how would you answer that? Like, what brings meaning to you? Or, I mean,
I feel really fortunate to have a career that I can actually call almost like a vocation, like a calling. Very early on in my career, so I used to have a job that I didn't find meaningful.
Yeah.
It was exhilarating. It was rewarding. I felt seen by management. It was intellectually, stimulating, but it just didn't feel meaningful to me. I was a product manager selling bar soap.
Really?
To like the sari stores of the Philippines.
Oh yeah, sorry store.
Yeah. So and that work is really meaningful work, and it's all that, but I didn't find it to be like meaningful to me. The work I do today is cut so deep into like what I think my mission in life is, which is when I look at all the many things I could do with my life, and like what are the kinds of pain I can alleviate in this world.
Yeah.
I look at the corporate world, I look at organizations and think there's so much pain that organizations bring to people, and if I can use my skills and my time to just improve that by a little bit, then I'll feel like it was worth a lifetime of work. So that's so making, like, helping organizations suck the life out of us less is kind of a battle cry I have for myself. Yeah,
man, that's cool. I guess, like, jumping back to the book you wrote, what I was gonna say was, like, before you published it, I guess, like, what I think about now is, like, what are people gonna say about this? Like how do you handle, like, feedback, or just maybe if it's negative or not something you didn't expect? Like, is that something, right? Because I think, like, anyone who does something that they pour their mind into, they don't want to. I mean, it goes for startup founders too, right? They're in a pitch meeting, the VC says no, and they have a tiff, right? Like,
my thing about criticism is like dig for it and try to find it. And I think, and the reason why I say that is, we've been given unsolicited criticism all along the way. People have told us there's nothing here, you shouldn't do this.
Right.
But I also find that when you publish a book, and maybe this might be specific to a book, or I bet even for founders, when you start to call yourself a CEO, like, people start to look at you with admiration, and then somehow all you hear are nice things. And for me, like, when I go through multiple days and that's all I hear, like, I always, you can call this paranoia, or you can call this, like, imposter syndrome, but I always ask myself, man, I wish I had someone who could sit me down and say, here are the 3 things that I think this book could have been better at.
Oh, yeah.
And so if one of you is listening and you've read the book and you want to give me feedback, please, I would love to hear it.
Man, yeah. Does that come natural to you, or, like, do you think, like, you had to, like, take baby steps to, embrace feedback, or I guess, like, get comfortable with? Because what I was thinking too, like a composer or like a musician, they'll play their song in front of no one, and they'll act like it's good, or like they'll think it's good, but they'll be nervous to go on a stage, right, and really perform in front of a lot of people. I guess that's, like, maybe from psychology, like what putting yourself, like, out there in front of, like, thousands of people does to somebody. When
you ask the question, the first thing that comes to mind is how. So you grew up in a Filipino family, but here in the Bay Area, I grew up in a Filipino family in the Philippines, and if you grew up in the Philippines, like, it is a very indirect communication culture.
Right, you're right.
No one will tell you anything bad. Everything is and to some extent, I see that here in the Bay Area. Like, there's this effervescence people have when they communicate. Like, everything's awesome and amazing, and so maybe in some sense, like, I crave the directness that I maybe didn't get growing up. I also, whenever I work with people, I always tell them as well, like, look, from me, you will always know where you stand. And maybe I say that to compensate for, like, my own kind of feeling unsure of myself, because no one ever told me you suck for these reasons, and then, well, you got better for, like, it's always been like things are good, or they don't say anything. So I don't know, maybe it's that.
Yeah, I've had bosses, like, tell me, like, yeah, you're underperforming or whatever.
Okay.
But those were jobs, like, I hated, so it's like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? but yeah, I mean, like, I guess, like, as you get to a job with, like, more meaning and, like, dependency on success for the company or whatever, like, yeah, those things do matter more.
And so I'll tell you a story of one of my managers gave me feedback.
Grab a sip of water.
Yeah. One of my managers gave me feedback, and I yeah. Good.
Oh man, it's a hot day today.
It is.
It's always hot.
It is hot. Yeah.
Shoot.
so I'm in shorts. You should have been in shorts.
Daly City has fog. You've been out there, right? Like Ceremony Mall or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So a manager was giving me feedback once, and I knew that would have been. I knew that the next time I would receive feedback, like negative feedback, would be a long time from then, and so I jumped on it and I said, okay, what else? Like, what else can I learn from? Because, again, I find here and in the Philippines, like, not a lot of people are gonna feel comfortable giving you feedback. Well, and maybe I've somehow have had some biased experiences, and maybe I find myself in places where they just don't give feedback. Or maybe I'm that brilliant. Who knows?
You could be brilliant. Yeah, you probably are.
I doubt it's that, though. I'm pretty sure it's not that. Gosh, if I were brilliant, we wouldn't be sitting here because, we would be sitting in a mansion maybe somewhere.
Hey, man. I'll expect that one day. Yeah, I mean, no, that's really cool. I mean, it's been good getting to know you. I think, like, I guess, like, to switch out of that into, like, maybe more, like, general conversation things. Like, so I guess, like, you grew up in the Philippines. Like, do you find that it was hard for you to adjust to living out here? And
yeah.
It was, or no?
So I actually, this book is not an autobiography by any means.
There's some stuff in there. Right?
There is a chapter 10, deep in chapter 10. Josh and I actually tell our own story of because we talk about how the work of an entrepreneur is accompanied by a lot of insecurity and self-doubt. Mm-hmm. And then we share our own. And the story I share there is actually the story of me leaving the Philippines and then moving to New York for school for the very first time.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you that the amount of insecurity that hit me in that moment, like, you come out of the Philippines and you think, well, I did well at my job, I did well at school, like, surely I'm gonna do well.
That's a dream, though. You're living the dream.
Well, yeah, and there was that nervousness of, like, okay, well, what's the big world like, right? So I go to Colombia, I go to New York, and somehow I particularly, like, get super intimidated by my colleagues who are, especially my white guy colleagues. Like, it was their eloquence. It was maybe the fact that they grew up speaking one language, and I had to, like, I struggled to put my thoughts into a coherent, like, English sentence. I had, Taglish is a big thing in the Philippines. Like, you're always inserting like Filipino words or Filipinoisms in there. Mm-hmm. And I had moments where I don't know if your parents ever call what your sneakers rubber shoes.
Rubber shoes, yeah.
So I remember like saying that once in Colombia, and people were like, "What the heck are rubber shoes?" And that's a Filipinoism,
man,
right?
I remember when I was like in kindergarten, my parents and my grandparents they raised me, right. So like, somebody said to like scoot over. I had no idea what they were saying. Like scoot over, like as in like move your butt down the bench. But I didn't know what they were saying.
It was a bit of an adjustment. I remember the one moment that really caught me off guard was so in the Philippines, your socioeconomic status is usually measured by your ability to speak English.
Really?
Which is really, I mean, it is what it is. Like I don't love it. It's just what it is. So if you speak good English, people usually assume that you are well-to-do, and usually people who beg on the streets don't speak English. So I go to this White Castle, which is a story for another day. Why I was even there. But I was in a White Castle with my cousin, and I buy my burger. And on the way out, this homeless guy.
Is this in Manila?
No, this is in New York.
Oh, New York.
He asks for my burger in really good English, and in that moment, I'm like 2 months or maybe a month into moving to the U.S. I am completely stunned. Like I had nothing to say, and somehow I just handed over all my food to this guy. It took me like a good few minutes to recover from that moment. And when I reflected on that, that evening and days after, I realized, wow, this is such a different world. Like like all the instincts you have about how to move in this space are getting challenged constantly. And so I brought a lot of insecurity through my journey to the U.S.
Man, that's a cool story. Have you ever seen the movie called Moscow on the Hudson? It's Robin Williams. It's on Netflix. It's Robin Williams, and he's like playing a Russian defector, and like you see like the the parallels between Soviet Union and he went to New York, so Manhattan too.
Yeah.
So I guess like the style of life in the big city like New York is a lot to fathom for anyone.
Yeah. It's full on.
What was it like living in Manila though? Just as somebody who's never been there, but
Yeah.
we'll go there. So
Yeah. No, you should you should come to the Manila, but also spend time in the beaches. That's really where it's at. You've been to Boracay and Palawan.
I've just been to Cebu and
Just Cebu. Well, Cebu has good beaches.
Yeah,
but not as good as Boracay or Palawan.
Is Boracay up north? Right?
No, Boracay is not too far from Cebu, and then Palawan is west of Cebu. But I think you need to go through Manila. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
What was
do you think you'll move back? Do you plan to move back there at all, or live there again?
Yeah, I dream of coming back to the Philippines and maybe serving in. I don't know. I won't run for office, but I dream of like doing something for the public school system in the Philippines. I've been, I used to volunteer time with Teach for the Philippines, which is the Teach for America equivalent there, and mentor a few startups in the education space, ed tech space. Yeah, I dream of going back. I do a little bit of work still there today with some startups that I support. I don't know if you've ever. I mean, you probably have used this imagery of like Filipinos are really not Asian. Like Filipinos are
their own
like
cuisine,
Mexicans.
right?
Well, I've experienced once as we're the Mexicans of Asia. I've also said we're the Italians of Asia. Like we're very like we're these loud, very like communal, very like party loving and kind of people and
religious too, yeah.
And religious, yeah. And yeah, we talk over each other. That's the other thing here. Like here, people take turns talking. In the Philippines, you're like to show engagement in a conversation, you're talking over each other, and that's a positive thing. Here, it's like, let me finish, please. Like I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just really engaged in the conversation. So I tell people, just think that I'm the Italian I'm part of the Italy of Asia.
Yeah. Do you find like raising a family out here is, I guess like in Asia, right? They'll like or like being Filipino, like there's more of like a, what do you call that, like a strictness to it maybe, or like maybe like a respect for your elders type of thing. But you come here, man, kids are they're messing with the
and I think part of it is, yes, the Filipino culture of respecting your elders, but it's also there's something about being an immigrant that hardens you a little.
Really?
You can't play games as an immigrant. You gotta be goal oriented. You have a certain resilience. So
it's sink or swim, huh? Well,
yeah,
kind
it's
of.
very much sink or swim.
You know.
Yeah, and like it takes a lot of tenacity to actually, immigrate. And I recently have been calling myself a serial immigrant because we've moved to Jakarta, to Singapore, well, New York initially, then Jakarta, Indonesia, then to Singapore, then to Taiwan. So we've done this a few times now, but yeah, there's something, I think you get hardened a little bit.
Yeah, nobody ever says that because, it's like they want to, I mean, I think as a Filipino, it's a little bit hard to like express your feelings when it comes to those things, right? Like,
yeah, and there's a bit of the kind of the duck. People in Stanford call it the duck, or in maybe UPenn, they have this expression called the duck face.
Oh, wow.
Which is like, ducks, when you see them above the water, they seem very graceful, but really underneath they're paddling like crazy. And I think in some ways, that's the gig somehow. You need to show effortlessness.
Oh gosh.
While hustling and trying to open doors, and
I think like, yeah. I mean, how are we on time? You have like
I do need to go and teach in a few minutes. So, but
5 more minutes.
Yeah. Or maybe another 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
And we need to wrap up. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's been a good conversation.
Yeah. Time flew.
Yeah. What else was I gonna ask you? I guess like what would be good to talk about for like another 2 minutes. I guess going on that train of thought, like, you're paddling as a duck, and on the surface you try to portray like this, or people in general, they'll try to portray like they have it figured out, they make a lot of money, they'll never show a sign of weakness, but like behind closed doors. And like even a good friend of mine who he used to be a teacher at Stanford, Rene Morcos, he was talking about how entrepreneurs behind closed doors, like they'll have like anger and like sadness and tears or whatever, and he said like people are working to gain the belongingness or like approval from their peers. So I guess that's kind of like what's the culture here. But maybe in Asia or Philippines, like I don't think that there's such a need to like be successful or like show off, right? Like if you
so here's the the paradox of success, right? And I've supported a lot of successful people, a lot of leaders at high places, high net worth individuals. They're incredibly insecure, lonely people.
Have therapists too,
They and in some ways you might say that it's because of those insecurities that they push themselves hard to achieve the thing that they've achieved. I think there's this glorification of there's this personality cult of the founder who is like crushing it constantly and always doing so well. But when you read, you read honest biographies, or you have the good fortune of speaking to them behind closed doors, it's not. It might not actually be the life you want, actually, in some respects.
Yeah. I mean, with the success comes like a territory,
Yeah.
Last question or last thing to talk about, Martin, is where could people purchase the Bonfire Moment or the other things you have not said yet that we can talk about?
Thank you. The Bonfire Moment is available in anywhere you buy books. We also have a really well produced audiobook. I'm not the voice of it. We got a really amazing voice actor for it. Bonfiremoment.com is a good place to learn more about the book. And then Josh and I are really active on LinkedIn, so reach out. You'll find us there. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Martin, it's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was really fun. Yeah.
Wow, that was good.